I have really been enjoying this series. So if you're new this week, we've been in a series where we've been covering the different spiritual gifts that we find in Scripture. And tonight we're going to be hitting the word of knowledge, the word of wisdom, and the discerning of spirits. And I have a lot to say and little time, so we're going to just hit the ground running. We're going to start in 1 Corinthians 12, so verses 7 through 11. But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each one for the profit of all. For to one is given the word of wisdom through the Spirit, to another the word of knowledge through the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit. I love the sound of Bible pages flipping. I love that. People still carry around the hard copy Bible. I love it. Where was I? To another gifts of healings by the same Spirit, to another the working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another discerning of spirits, to another different kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues. But one and the same Spirit works all these things, distributing to each one as he wills. And so we've been looking at gifts from Romans 12, Ephesians 4, and from 1 Corinthians 12 as well. All of the gifts that we're covering tonight will be coming from this passage in 1 Corinthians. And there are different ways that you can classify or categorize the gifts, and this is one of the things that can help make sense. And anytime you can organize or categorize things, it helps with understanding. One of the ways that you can categorize the gifts that we're going to be covering tonight is the revelation gifts, because all three of them involve the Spirit of God revealing something to you through this gift. And so just kind of a flyover of the three gifts we're going to be hitting. The word of knowledge reveals information regarding the past or present. Word of wisdom reveals plans and purposes regarding the future. Discerning of spirits reveals the source of something. And so we're going to unpack what each of those mean throughout the night. And as we tackle each gift, we're going to look at what the gift is, along with some examples around it, how this gift functions, how to know if you have this gift, how do you practice in this gift, and what does this gift reveal about God? And that's one of the things that we've talked about in this series so far, is that a study on the gifts is as much of a study on the gift giver than it is the gift itself. Because you see something about the character or the nature of the person giving the gift in the way that the gift comes. So that's what we're going to be looking at. First gift we're hitting tonight is the word of knowledge. So the word of knowledge, what is it? It's a word of knowledge is when God gives you information or facts concerning the past or present that you have no access to other than by the Spirit. Okay, so it's whenever God reveals something to you, facts or information about somebody, their past or their present, and before you flip out about God revealing things about your past to other people, because that can be a scary thing. I don't know if you have things in your past that you're not like super proud to broadcast to the whole world. I have that. So it can be a little scary to think that God might be looping people in on things about, what's going on in your life currently, or things that you've walked through in your life before. But before you flip out about it, the purpose in this is never to condemn or to hurt. Okay? The reason God will reveal things to you, and the reason why this is a gift, is always to bring hope or healing, to bring humility, to help out. Like, that's why God will give this gift, words of knowledge. And we're going to look at this in a few examples. First one we're going to look at is Jesus with the woman at the well in John 4. Very familiar passage, so we're not going to turn to it. But in this story, you can go read it later if you want to. But in John chapter 4, Jesus is having this interaction with this woman. And in this conversation, he says, hey, why don't you go and call your husband? And she says, I don't have a husband. And he goes, I know. You've had 5 husbands, and the man that you're currently living with isn't even your husband. And so what we see here, this is an example of a word of knowledge. Jesus has information revealed to him about this woman's past and present circumstance, just facts, information revealed. And the reason that this is revealed to him isn't for the purpose of condemning this woman, okay? There's so much that's going on here in this story that at just first read, you can look at this and go, man, like that's kind of harsh. Like Jesus is just kind of airing out her dirty laundry. But there's way more that's going on here. And we don't have the time to get into all of the weeds of that. But what I want you to look at is what is the fruit that comes out of this conversation. The woman does not leave the conversation condemned. The woman leaves the conversation full of hope. She's alive. She's excited because she's encountered Jesus. She has this revelation that the person that she's talking to is the Messiah. And then she goes and she tells her whole town, like, hey, you guys got to come out and meet this man that told me everything I ever did. And what ends up happening is a whole town comes out, starts interacting with Jesus, and then they come to the conclusion, they say, you know, we have decided, not just because of this woman's testimony, but because we have seen it ourselves, that you are the Savior of the world. So what was the fruit that came from this word of knowledge? Something that on the surface you can look at and go, oh, like, God, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. What's the fruit? What happens? This woman comes to a revelation of Jesus as Messiah, and so does a whole town. Okay, so we're looking at the fruit here. Another example that we're going to look at comes from the disciple in Damascus in Acts chapter 9, because you can look at the story of the woman at the well and go, yeah, well, that's Jesus. Okay, of course he knows things like that because he's the Son of God. All right, so that's why he was able to have that word of knowledge. Well, here in Acts chapter 9, we see the word of knowledge coming to somebody who's not Jesus and not even an apostle. He's just a regular dude. He's just another one of the disciples. And so Acts chapter 9, verse 10 and 12 says, now there was a disciple at Damascus named Ananias. The Lord said to him in a vision, Ananias. And he said, here I am, Lord. And the Lord said to him, rise and go to the street called Straight, and at the house of Judas, look for a man of Tarsus named Saul. For behold, he is praying. And he has seen in a vision a man named Ananias come and lay his hands on him so that he might regain his sight. This is another example of a word of knowledge where God is revealing information to this disciple, Ananias. He's telling him the name of a street, which house to go to, and the name of the person that he's supposed to pray for. Okay, information that he would have no access to other than the Spirit of God actually revealing it to him. And so we'll circle back to this. One of the things I want you to notice here is a few things. One, this is just another disciple, okay? This is not some super special apostle. This is just another one of the disciples that's operating in this gift. Another thing is how this word came to him. It says that it came in a vision. And this leads us to how this gift functions. Sometimes you'll receive a word of knowledge through words. You'll have a word come to mind. Sometimes a word of knowledge will come to you in the form of a picture or a vision. You'll see something. Other times it may come to you in the form of a dream. God can speak to us in a variety of ways. He can reveal this to us in a variety of ways. And oftentimes this gift functions alongside other gifts like evangelism, healing, and words of wisdom. Others as well, but those are just some examples. So for, looking at John chapter 4, Jesus gives this woman a word of knowledge, and what comes along with it? Evangelism. Like a whole city has this revelation of Jesus as the Savior of the world. It's not just, hey, here's a cool party trick, okay? I can read your mail. Isn't that awesome? No, it's for a reason. It's for a purpose. It's leading to something else. Another example is with healing. Oftentimes, words of knowledge work in conjunction with healing in miracles. Friends of mine just recently, a couple weeks ago, traveled to Brazil, and they saw God work awesome miracles and healings through them, specifically with words of knowledge, where they would be ministering with a group of people and they'd say, hey, does anyone, they they had this word that somebody has like spots on their eyes and it's impairing their vision. And so with that particular word, I think 6 people came up and said, yeah, that's something that I'm dealing with. They prayed for those 6 people, and 5 of them end up getting healed, okay? One of them was almost completely blind, has their vision completely restored. Another word was pressure in the left ear. So they gave that word of knowledge, which is the Spirit revealed something to them about something that people are currently experiencing. Someone is currently, like you have pain or you have had pain, pressure in your left ear. And with that one, 5 people came up. 4 of them were instantly healed. The 5th one they prayed for a second time and was healed the second time. The healing manifested instantly. And so what happens a lot of times with words of knowledge is words of knowledge can build up our faith to receive healing. Whenever somebody comes to you and says, hey, I know this is random, but do you have pain in your right ankle? And you say, yes. How do you know that? They say, well, I feel like God revealed that to me because he wants to heal you. When somebody can tell you something that they would have no other way of knowing other than the Spirit of God revealing it to them, then it builds up your faith. And so sometimes too with healing specifically, another form that God can reveal a word of knowledge to people is through, you can feel it in your body. This sounds strange, but sometimes you may be praying for somebody and you're perfectly fine, okay? You have no pain, no previous ailments or whatever, and you have all of a sudden as you're praying for this person, you have pain in your left elbow. This just super sharp, makes it like your arm feels like it's just gone numb. That may be, it may be you just happen to have elbow pain that day. It could also be that God is giving you a word of knowledge. He's revealing something to you about something that the person that you're praying for is experiencing. And that's when you just take that as a clue. Maybe this is something that God is revealing to me, and you ask the person, hey, do you have any, this may sound strange or whatever, but do you have any elbow pain that you're dealing with at times like makes your arm feel like it's going numb? They say, yeah, how do you know that? And then that builds up the faith for them to receive healing. So this is one of the things that I've seen God work, like one of the ways that I've seen him perform miracles and healings through other people is with things like that. It also can lead to words of wisdom. It oftentimes does. Whenever you're given a word of knowledge for somebody, it will often also lead to a word of wisdom. And I don't have time for that example. Moving on. It won't always, another thing when it comes to how to function in this gift, know that it won't always be the full picture. Okay, when God reveals something to you in the form of a word or maybe a literal picture, you're not always going to get the full thing right away. And a lot of times whenever this gift is talked about, it's talked about in a way that it comes across as the person who saw this or had this word, like the whole thing just played out before them and they knew with 100% certainty that it was from God. That's often not the case. A lot of times it just starts with something small, something so small that you find yourself wondering, is this really from God? Or is this just something that I'm thinking about? It's often very subtle. There's a story so an example of this, Pete Greig in his book, How to Hear God, he shares this story. He was coordinating a large ministry event and he ran into an old friend of his at this event. And he said, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. What's going on? And his friend had just received prayer. And he said, well, I haven't been to something like this in about 10 years because I was in a bike accident and I suffered a severe brain injury from it. And I've had just a lot of physical ailments that resulted from that. And then not just the physical stuff that came with it, but I also, as a result of that accident, found myself in a dark place for a long time. And so I haven't been to anything like this, and I was terrified to come in the first place, let alone go up and receive prayer. But I'm glad I did, because whenever I went up, this guy approached me and he said, hey, whenever, I don't know if this resonates with you or not, but whenever you came up, I saw this picture of you on a bike going downhill and then everything goes dark. Does that mean anything to you? And he said, yeah, you just described to me my accident. And what happened in that moment is this man realized that even though he had turned his back on God, God had not turned his back on him. And so Pete Gregg, who had coordinated this event, he finds the guy who gave him the word, and he calls him up on stage. And he said, hey, which I would love to just be put on the spot like that, right? Hey, why don't you tell us how you were able to receive such an accurate word for a complete stranger? And the guy said, well, as I was approaching this man, I just had this random picture pop into my mind. And I thought, man, that's so random and so strange that might be from God. And so Pete asks him, how sure were you that it was a word from God? And he said, maybe like 10%. And so he asked his friend, how happy are you that this guy took a risk on 10%? And that 10%, the willingness to take that risk on that 10% changed this guy's world. So you're not always going to get the full picture. And very rarely, I don't know about for others who operate in this, for me, very rarely is it ever like 100% certainty. I know for a fact, no room for doubt that this is from God. It's often subtle enough to where it's like, I really do think that this is from God. It lines up with other things that we'll look at in a minute. But there's always, it always comes in a more subtle way than I would like it to. So how do I know if I have it? First thing I want you to know is that hearing God is accessible for every believer. Okay? Jesus in John 10 said that my sheep hear my voice, not just the really gifted people hear my voice. Okay? Hearing God is the right of every son and daughter of God. And just like how we are all supposed to walk in mercy, show mercy, but some have the gift of mercy. We're all called to give, but some have the gift of giving. We're all called to hear God. We all have the ability to hear God's voice, hear the voice of our shepherd. We're sheep, he's the shepherd. We all have the ability to hear him, but some have the ability to hear words of knowledge. So how do you know if you have it? You may have this gift if you often find yourself having random thoughts, words, or images coming to your mind as you're praying for someone or interacting with someone. Where it's not, you have this word, this phrase, this picture that wasn't necessarily something that was on your mind, like it wasn't something that you were thinking about, but as you're praying for this person or interacting with them, this image or this word or this phrase, this thought comes to mind. And so you ask them, hey, I saw this, does it mean anything to you? And they say, well, that just described, one of something that I've experienced in my life. Or you say, hey, this name, does this name mean anything to you? And then they say, well, that's actually the name of someone really close to me. So an example of that, another friend of mine was recently traveling, and they were she was on her shuttle to the airport, and she felt like the Lord, she kept hearing the word Jeremy in her heart. And again, like when you hear that, you may think, okay, it was super clear, audible voice from heaven came down and told her this word. That's not the case, okay? It was probably subtle, and she kept hearing the word Jeremy. And so she asked the shuttle driver, hey, does the name Jeremy mean anything to you? He said, that's the name of my nephew. And so she followed that up with, she said, what I hear the Lord, I'm a follower of Jesus, and I think what Jesus might be saying to you in this is that Jeremy God has a big call on your nephew's life, even though he's going through a really rough time right now. That even though he's going through a really rough time right now, that doesn't negate that God still has plans and purposes for him. The shuttle driver just starts weeping. And it described what was really going on. And so, again, be willing to be willing. It may be a name, it may be a picture. Okay, how do you practice this gift? ABC is an easy thing to remember. If I could sing or dance, I'd probably bust out into some Jackson 5 right now, but I can do neither of those. So The A, we'll start there. A, ask. Ask God why he's revealed it to you. Because it's not always going to be for the reason that you think. He may reveal something to you, he may give you a word of knowledge that isn't meant to be shared with the person, but it's meant to inform how you're to pray for that person. Okay, so that's why we start with asking. B, is it biblical? Does this word line up with the counsel of God's word? God's spoken word will never contradict his written word. C, Christ-like. Is the word itself congruent with the character of Christ? And then also, is the way that you're delivering the word congruent with the character of Christ? Is it being delivered in humility? Or is it being delivered in, like, this is what God said? Like, I would just generally advise to avoid the phrase, thus saith the Lord. Taking a more humble or subtle approach of like, I think this is what God might be saying, would probably land better. I think humility with this particular gift is important because people who operate in this gift oftentimes in the church find themselves to be labeled as superstars. Okay, we've talked about some gifts that are like behind the scenes. When you operate in this gift at a very high level, people know it and they're like, oh man, like that lady over there, like she's the superstar. She's super spiritual. He's like, he can read your mail. Like, that's why it's important to walk in humility. If you're humble and teachable, you're going to be willing to be held accountable. A team cannot rise above the level of accountability. This is true in sports, it's true in business, it's true in ministry. If you want to grow, you have to have a commitment to accountability. So for those with this gift, be willing to be humble and be held accountable. Places to practice this gift. Ministry teams. That's what, you don't have to have this gift to be on our ministry team, but if you have this gift, the ministry team would be a great place for you. Okay, some people on our ministry team operate in this gift, others don't, and that's okay. They have other giftings. But if you operate in this gift, ministry team would be a great fit. Also, missions trips, whether that's across the world or across the street, across town. Okay, when you go to the store, be willing to be used in this gift because God will do it. Be willing to use this gift wherever you go. So what about this gift? What about God is revealed in this gift? This gift reveals the love of God for each person. If you've ever been on the receiving end of this gift, it is like in that moment, you have this incredible awareness of the reality of God and God's love for you. He sees and knows you. Second gift, word of wisdom. The word of wisdom reveals, so whereas the word of knowledge reveals information regarding the past and present, the word of wisdom reveals God's plans and purposes for the future. What is it? This gift is when God gives a situational word acutely applicable in a moment that provides insight for people to take their next steps. How are we doing? We doing okay? Okay. I've just been flying through things. Very little humor tonight. I'm sorry. Okay. Maybe next time. All right. Like any spiritual gift, there's something in this that's for everyone, right? You don't have, like, godly wisdom is something that in Christ we have all had lavished upon us. It's something that is available to any believer. In James 1:5, we see James write this: if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generally to all. Okay, he gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. So in James we see, if any of you wants wisdom, ask God for it because he's going to give it to everybody. And then in 1 Corinthians 12, we see Paul write, for to one is given the word of wisdom through the Spirit. Wisdom is for all. The gift of the word of wisdom is for some. The word of wisdom will never contradict godly wisdom. The difference between godly wisdom and the word of wisdom comes with the specificity to the situation. Okay, so here's an example of the difference. I have a friend who which may be surprising to you that I have friends. I do have friends. So one night I have this dream, and in it is my friend, and he's standing in front of this particular building, and someone who is a leader at the organization at that building comes and he offers my friend a job. And in the dream, everything about it was saying that God's favor and his blessing is on this, that it's part of God's plan and his purpose for my friend. So the next day I call my friend, and he's a mature believer, so I don't have to give all of the like, hey, I could be wrong, whatever. He knows that. He knows that I can be wrong sometimes. Okay, so call my friend, said, hey, I had this dream last night, and I told him what it was, and I said, I don't know if that means anything to you, but there it is. And he said, well, that's crazy, because that guy just called me this morning to set up a meeting. So I'm like, well, that's cool. And so I tell him, like, hey, my sense in the dream was that this was like God is in this. He's on it. And so he ends up having the meeting later on that day, and that man offers him a job at the place that was in the dream. Okay, and so here's the difference. I'm not sharing that story to be like, oh, hey, that's cool. Look at him, that's good for you. I'm sharing that to say this. There is biblical wisdom, godly wisdom, that we can learn from when it comes to our jobs, right? We can see the counsel of God, the wisdom of God is that work is a good thing. Okay, it's one of the ways that we image God. We can see that with anything that we do with all your heart as unto the Lord. Like there's godly counsel and wisdom that can inform how we go about our jobs. Now, he doesn't give us specifically which job to take, but there's still sound godly wisdom as it pertains to our work. There's general wisdom, which would be things like, are you a good fit for the culture? Are they a good fit for you? What's the pay range? Do you have to travel a lot? Like those kinds of considerations. But then there's the word of wisdom, which was this specific situation, this specific job, God is leading you in it. He's blessing your path on it. And so having that word of wisdom helped inform my friend on his next steps to take. Okay, does that make sense? Do you see the difference between those? Okay, so back to Ananias. So Ananias was given a word of knowledge. Here's this street, here's this house, here's this person. Ananias pushes back on God and says, listen, I've heard about this guy, okay? I've heard about this man, how much evil he has done to your saints at Jerusalem. And here he has the authority from the chief priest to bind all who call on your name. But the Lord said to him, go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before the Gentiles and kings and children of Israel. For I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name. So what went from just a word of knowledge is now a word of wisdom. God is revealing to Ananias his plans and his purposes for Saul. And there's no way that when Ananias shows up that he doesn't share this information with Paul. Like I would imagine after he prays for Paul and Paul receives his sight back, he goes, how in the world did you know where I was? And so Ananias tells him, God told me where you were, who you were. And I told God, like, hey, I'm kind of scared of this guy because he's done this crazy stuff. But God told me not to worry because he's chosen you as his instrument to carry his name to the Gentiles and to kings and to Israel. Like there's no way he didn't share that word with Paul. And so what you see here is somebody who is kind of a nobody, right? Like he doesn't have books in the Bible that he wrote. His name's not a household name, but you see this disciple just operating in the gifts, stewarding the gifts that God has given him in obedience, and he has played a huge role in God's story. Amen. How does this gift function? Like words of knowledge, this revelation can come in the form of words, images, or dreams, and they're often practical instructions like go to this place or read this book. Every time the supernatural, situational word of wisdom is given, you recognize that it came from Jesus' lips to you. You know that this isn't just a general bit of wisdom, but this was something specifically for you from God. So an example of this, I was reading a book a while back, within the year, whatever. So reading a book, and as I was reading it, I had a person come to mind. And I thought, well, that's random. So the next time I saw this person, I gave them a copy of the book. And, just encouraged them in a few things, whatever. And I said, hey, this specific chapter is what came to mind. You should check it out. So a few weeks go by, and I circle back with the person, and they come to me and they say, you have no idea, but literally hours before you had handed me that book, I had just submitted my letter of resignation to my employer. And the reason why I did it was addressed in the chapter of that book that you gave me. And I realized that this isn't the right time for me to walk away from this job. And so fast forward months down the road, circling back, and there's the awareness of, had I gone through and walked away, it wouldn't have been the right time. There were still things that God had for me there. And so what was it? It was a word of wisdom. God revealing something about their next steps to take that I had there was no information in the natural that I would have had. It was God speaking to them. We see this. Yep, moving on. Okay. How do you know if you have this? You have images or ideas that come into your mind for other people. Things like, you should listen to this sermon or read this passage. And they come up to you later and say, that is exactly what I needed. Now, I'm a believer that anytime the Word of God is preached or read, there is something in it for us. But there is something, there's a difference with the general wisdom from God that you can glean. And then whenever somebody says, hey, you should listen to this or read this, and when you do, it was God speaking specifically to the situation that you're walking through at that moment that now informs the steps that you take moving forward from there. Does that make sense? Okay. How do you practice this gift? You can take the same notes from the word of knowledge and insert them here. So things like ABC, ask. If God reveals something to you, ask God, why is it that you're revealing this to me? Before you just assume that it's so that you can tell them, okay? So ask, is it biblical? If somebody comes up to you, I can't say you. Someone were to come up to me and say, hey, I saw this picture, you and I getting hitched, we lived happily ever after, okay? If that word came from anyone other than this woman right here, I would say, I think you missed it, okay? I'm already married. You have to see, is it congruent with the whole counsel of God? And also, is it Christ-like? Another filter that you can put on this whenever you're looking at how do you practice this gift that I want to add is this question. What's the worst thing that can happen if I get it wrong? What's the worst thing that can happen if I get it wrong? You may hear that and go, well, that's awfully pessimistic. That's a pessimistic way. That's doubt and unbelief. Okay? You may consider it pessimistic. I consider it counting the cost. Okay? There are low risk words that you can give. So for example, the word that I gave to the person with the book. Okay? If it's accurate, awesome. If God was speaking specifically to them something that informs their next steps, great. If I completely missed it, it's still a good read, okay? They may get something from it, low risk. A high risk example, whenever I was youth pastoring, I'll make it quick. When I was youth pastoring, there was a boy in our youth who had severe heart conditions, serious issues. Another well-meaning youth, practicing, trying to grow in the gifts, well-meaning, was praying for him and said, hey, I see this picture, and what God is saying in this is that he's healing your heart. This is an example of a high-risk word, okay? Because what ends up playing out is, unfortunately, that young man did not live much longer, okay? Again, well-meaning boy. But it was a high-risk word. And with high-risk words, you want to consider a couple things here. One is your track record and your level of experience, okay? If you're pretty new to this and you're still trying to get your legs under you, you may want to be careful with sharing the high-risk words, okay? That doesn't mean that they're not from God. It just means there's a couple things that I would consider before sharing them with the person. If you don't have this track record or experience of being able to accurately hear and discern God speaking to you, then, that may help inform whether or not I'm going to share something that's high risk with this person. The other thing to consider is the level of maturity of the person that you're giving it to. Okay? If you're giving it, so if I was giving a word to the friend that I mentioned earlier, very mature believer, and I shared with him a high risk word and I completely missed it, I know that he is like, our relationship is mature enough. His relationship with God is mature enough that neither one of them will be shaken. Okay? He'll just go, listen, bud, you missed it. Okay? And we move on from there. But if the level of maturity of the person that you're sharing it with is such that it will wreck their faith in God, if you miss it, then you might want to take that into consideration on how you go about sharing that word, okay? You may weigh that out and go, and again, I'm not saying it's not from God, and I'm not saying that you should never share it. I'm just saying there is probably some wisdom in how we practice words of wisdom, okay? So you weigh it out, and if you know that the level of maturity of that person is such that they can't handle, like it will wreck their faith in God, then maybe that word that God revealed to you just informs how you're to pray for them. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's see. Where to practice this gift: ministry teams, life groups, student ministry. What we learn about God through this gift is we see just how deeply he cares for each of his children. Discerning of spirits. Quickly. I'm going to start with what it's not. The discerning of spirits is not the same thing as discernment in general. So discernment is something that is for all believers to grow in. Hebrews 5:14, Paul said, or the writer of Hebrews says, but solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. Discernment, the ability to distinguish good from evil, is something that comes with maturing in Christ and is available for everyone. The gift of the discerning of spirits is also not the gift of suspicion. A lot of people think that they have the gift of discerning spirits, but really they're just suspicious people. They go, I know what that person's like. Really, you're just reading a book by its cover and you have no clue. It's also not sympathy or intuition. Or empathy, sorry. It's also not empathy or intuition. These are awesome gifts that God gives people in their personality and temperament, where they can be highly attuned to the feelings and the emotions and what's going on with other people. That's great. It's a gift that God gives us in our personalities and our temperaments, but it's not the same thing as the discerning of spirits. This gift is a special ability that God gives to some members of the body to know with assurance whether the source of something is divine, human, or satanic. Okay, so this discernment, you can be discerning up, across, or down. And the discerning of the spirits is discerning the source of something. And so with discerning up, divine, it's the ability to discern when the Spirit of God is in something. You can walk in and know, like, regardless of what it looks like, God is at work here. God's doing something. You just know it. An example of this, Matthew 16, verse 17, Jesus asked the disciples, who do you say that I am? Peter says, you're the Christ, you're the Son of God. And Jesus' response is, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who's in heaven. Jesus discerned the source of that statement. He realized that that wasn't from Peter, it wasn't from the devil, it was from his Father. He was discerning the source. You can also discern across. So with discerning the spirit at the human level is the ability to discern when somebody is in the flesh. So everything may look good on the outside, but you can tell when somebody's in the flesh. So for example, let's say Mac has been talking smack about me, and I didn't choose him because he does that, but mostly because his name rhymes with smack and it just works well. So Mac's been talking smack about me. He's been running me down and all of this stuff, and I catch wind about it, and I'm upset. And so I decide, you know what? Next message, I'm preaching on like gossip and how destructive it can be and all of that. And on the surface, everything about it may be sound biblical teaching. But if you have the gift of discerning of spirits, you're able to tell something's off here, okay? Because it's not coming from the source is not coming from a place of a desire to be helpful, to equip the saints. And like at times there may be issues in the body that need to be addressed. That's one thing. But if it's coming from a place of wanting to be helpful or equip the saints, that's one thing. If it's coming out of my flesh, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm hurt, and now it's coming out at him and it's just with this facade. Like if you have the gift of discerning of spirits, you'll be able to be like, I know everything sounds right, looks right, but something is not right here. There's also discerning down, discerning the satanic, the ability to discern when the enemy is at work in something. Poor Peter, okay, just a few verses after he gets commended for hearing from God, Jesus starts to say, hey, if I'm the Messiah, here's what the Messiah does. He suffers. Peter's like, no, far be it from you, God, you're not going to suffer. Jesus' response, get behind me, Satan. So same guy, just like a few breaths separated, Jesus is discerning the spirit, the source of where something's coming from. The source of this was from above. The source of this doesn't mean that Peter is demonically oppressed. It just means the source of where those words are coming from that are trying to plant seeds in my head that I don't actually have to go through with this. The source of that is satanic. There's other things there too. Moving on. How do you know if you have this gift? You can sense or see what is happening in the spirit. Again, you can walk into the room and you know, regardless of what it looks like, that God is here. God is moving, he's working, he's touching people's lives. Even if everything else is, you're like, the worship team, like not that great, not here, because our worship team's always awesome. But like you walk into a place and you're like, the worship team, whatever, the guy speaking, whatever. But you just know the Spirit of God is here and he's working. And then at the end, like nothing in the natural is saying that. But at the end, like 30 people give their lives to God and people's lives are changed forever. You were able to discern and see something that's happening in the spirit. Same thing, you can walk into a room and know that the enemy is at work in something. It's only 7:30. We were way ahead of schedule. I mean, I'm out of time, but that's because the worship team and Wallace, you guys did great. I appreciate that. So I'm going to breathe a little bit. There's a couple things here that I didn't know if I'd have time for that I do want to hit around the discerning of spirits. God reveals this to us, and it's not a far-fetched idea to think that God might reveal what's happening in the spirit in similar ways as he reveals words of knowledge and words of wisdom. So by that I mean, that discernment may come in the form of words or thoughts or images, okay? Just like we talked about words of knowledge may be sensations in your body. You feel a certain pain, and it's a word of knowledge that somebody's experiencing that. I think discerning of spirits can happen a similar way. You walk into a room and you can feel in your body that the peace of God rests on a certain place or is resting on a certain person. And then you can also feel your skin crawling when you walk into a certain place or you're around certain people, and you're discerning what's happening in the unseen realm. Another thing, so also along the line of thoughts, this was something that was super helpful for me whenever I heard someone share on it, is sometimes God can reveal to you what's happening in the unseen realm, also in the thoughts that you're having. So an example of this could be your life is great. Relatively speaking, we all have our challenges, but like You're doing good, you're in a healthy place, all of that. And then out of nowhere, you have this picture, this thought come across your mind of ending your life. You're like, what in the world is that about? Like that is nowhere on my radar. That could be just a random thought that you need to take captive and deal with. Something that could also be is it could be that you're discerning the spirit of suicide that's on somebody around you. That sounds weird. So I could be just like messing people up here. And if it's a mess, I'll clean it up later. But this is something that I've heard others talk about that I have experienced myself, where I will all of a sudden have these random thoughts or words or images that will pop into my mind that I know weren't necessarily coming from me, nor was it an attack of the enemy against me. I, in those moments, ask God, the ask part, how do you practice this? You ask, God, what is this about? Is this a thought I need to take captive? Are you revealing something to me for someone else? And sometimes you'll be picking up on a spiritual attack that's on another person. And so that may seem strange. It may seem weird that God would reveal what's happening in the spirit or what's happened in your past or the steps to take in your future. But it's not, it may seem weird, but it's not without a purpose. Okay? That's why we have to ask, how do you practice this? You ask God, why is he revealing this to you? Because you're not the one who discerned it. God is the one who gave you the ability to discern it. And so if he gave you the ability to discern it, it must be for a reason. It might be for you to see someone experience freedom and healing. It might be that you're discerning the Spirit of God on someone as they're doing something or stepping into something. And you're discerning, man, God is on you in this way. And so the reason why he's revealing that to you is so that you can encourage that person. Okay, so we ask why. How do you practice it? Again, let me just circle back. This may sound strange, like other gifts that we've talked about. God gives the gift of teaching. I can track with that. That's cool. That's normal. God can give you the ability to know things that you wouldn't know any other way, or discern what's happening in the spirit. That sounds a little strange, but apparently it was important enough for God, despite how it might come across as strange. It apparently was important enough to God to give it to his church as a gift. So, where to practice it? Ministry teams would be a great way. Intercession. Just during service, be interceding, because anytime we're gathered, there is a fight that's happening that is in the spirit. And so if you have this gift, interceding during services would be a great way to put that into practice. What does this reveal about God's character? In this gift, we see the heart of our Heavenly Father who desires for his children to walk in truth, light, and freedom. So, that's all I have to say about that.